Hi, everybody, and welcome to Lit Chick, Friday, November 5th. I'm your host, Alex Hoops, and I'm super excited to be here with Sophie Cousens, one of my favorite rom-com authors, here to talk about her new book, Just Haven't Met You Yet. Welcome, Sophie, to Lit Chick.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on.
You're so welcome, and I'm going to let our readers have a bit of background about you first, and then we can't wait to hear all about your book. Sophie Cousens worked as a TV producer in London for more than 12 years and now lives on the island of Jersey in the UK, which I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about, taking care of her two small children. She is the author of This Time Next Year and Just Haven't Met You Yet. So we are thrilled to have you. Thank you so much for coming. Are you broadcasting in from Jersey?
I am, yeah. From my bedroom in Jersey, hoping my children don't come upstairs and interrupt. And this is like one of the first interviews I've done about the book, so it's really exciting because it feels like real all of a sudden. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, it comes out next Tuesday, November 9th, right? So we're really excited for all of your US readers to hear about this book. You had so many fans for This Time Next Year, and having read both of them, this is very in the similar vein, similar humor, but with a lot of other really great new characters. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about just what the book is about broadly, and then we can get into some of the fun details.
So Just Haven't Met You Yet is all about our heroine Laura, who goes on a work trip to the Channel Islands, to Jersey. And when she's at the airport, she picks up the wrong suitcase from the airport. And she gets back to her hotel and she opens the case and she sees in it all these things that lead her to believe that the suitcase owner must be her soulmate. So he's got like her favorite book, he's got music by her favorite artist, he's got all these little clues that just make her think this must be destiny intervening. And so she sets out on a mission to find Hot Suitcase Man.
Hot Suitcase Man, yes. And I love that. That's always the fear, that you're going to grab the wrong suitcase. I feel like I grew up in a very quirky family with very distinctive looking suitcases. So I was always the person thinking like, oh God, like this is ours. Sorry, everyone. But yeah, they look exactly the same. Laura grabs the wrong one and she finds some items inside. Are you willing to give us a sneak preview on what's maybe inside the bag? Is that a spoiler?
Yeah, no, it's not a spoiler. So she has To Kill a Mockingbird, which is actually her favorite book of all time, and also was her dad's favorite book. And he gave her a copy, so it has like kind of real sentimental value to her. And then she finds sheet music for Phil Collins' greatest hits. And she's a massive Phil Collins fan because her dad was really into it. And again, so she sadly lost her dad when she was younger. So a lot of these things are kind of memories that she holds dear, connected to her dad. And then there's some perfume that her mother used to wear, which whoever owns the case has wrapped up as a gift for someone. And there's a fisherman's jumper, and she's got a real thing about like men in hot fishermen, you know, the kind of like cable knit that like Ryan Gosling would wear to like a cabin in the woods.
Absolutely.
That kind of jumper that like all men look hot in that kind of jumper.
Absolutely.
So she basically decides, oh my God, whoever owns this is just like my perfect man.
I know, I loved it. And I felt the same way about those items. I was just like, once you see the jumper, you're like, okay, yeah, whoever is in this earns it. I feel like, you know, summer gets its cred for being like a sexy season. You get to show some skin, but there's something for me about like bundling up or like having a nice pea coat or a jumper, a sweater. Like really
100%.
Cozy vibes are hot.
100%. I did like an Instagram story on men in hot jumpers, and I had like, 20 pictures of just like hot men in fisherman's jumpers, and like it blew up. Everyone was like, yes, why did I not know? I was obsessed with these jumpers until now. It's true. Everyone looks super hot in them. So yeah, I kind of keep on buying them for my husband, but he doesn't really like them.
You just got to turn the heat in the house down like really, really low. Just force it to happen.
Force it to happen.
Well, I love this meet cute idea. And I think what's so skillfully done in Just Haven't Met You Yet is it's almost like a commentary on the rom-com genre itself, because you have Laura working for a website called Love Life, right? And she's learning these stories about how various people met. And that meeting is so important. That's something in rom-coms you see all the time. Like, I want to find my person when I'm in the grocery store, we both pull the same book at the library or whatever. And she ultimately finds, you know, sometimes that these meet cutes aren't exactly what you'd imagined, which I think is really smart. Did you have a lot of fun coming up with the various ways that people could meet each other? And
yes, that was a really fun part of the book for me, because I think, I mean, for me as a rom-com writer as well, you know, your publisher is always asking you to come up with like a really good meet cute. So you're kind of used to like thinking that way. And, you know, for me as well, my parents had an amazing story of how they met. They actually met through letters, and they kind of fell in love as like pen pals first, and like just super romantic. And I think what's interesting about the modern day is a lot of people meet in like not a particularly exciting way. They might just like meet online or friends of friends. You know, my husband was a friend of a friend. And I think this, one of the things that this book looks at is kind of how important is the story, and, you know, can the story be deceptive, and like, do our romantic expectations get too caught up in sort of the great meeting rather than the substance of what a relationship might be.
Absolutely. And I related to that a lot. I mean, my parents have been together, I'm going to get the number wrong, so hopefully my mom's not watching, but something like 35 years. And their story of how they met, yes, is something they tell every year. It's a big part of their sort of personal mythology, very meaningful for what our family is and what we value. You know, they met in college. They had a very like intense intellectual kind of a meeting of the minds. And so you look at that growing up and you're like, okay, that's the standard. I need to find that. And I met my fiance, who I'm madly in love with, online. And I think that that's very common for women in their 30s right now. And so it's interesting to see, you not only aspire to that, but people sort of do retroactively tell themselves a story that they think is going to, you know, mean something. And that's very much a theme in this book.
Because also it's ingrained in our culture. When you're a couple and you meet someone, that's like, and you're kind of at a social event, a lot of people ask, oh, how did you guys meet? Like, people are curious, like, how did your love story begin? And I think that is something that, you can start to kind of mythologize. And also, if you read a lot of rom-coms and you see a lot of rom-com films, you know, the character of Laura, she is like quite a kind of naive romantic, but she just loves these stories. And she's been meeting people her whole career who have these incredible stories of how they met. And so obviously her expectations, she's kind of tuned in looking for like, where's my meet cute? When's it going to happen?
Absolutely.
I had a lot of fun with that.
I'm sure it reminded me a little bit of When Harry Met Sally, when you see the flashbacks of people talking how they met. And it's so expertly done. It feels like an homage to all of our favorite rom-coms.
Oh, thank you.
So another thing I want to talk about, which I think is big here, is the island of Jersey, which is a huge character in the book. Are you being like sponsored by the Jersey government, or how did this book come along? Have you just always wanted to write about home?
I wish I was sponsored by the Jersey government. I keep on telling them, I've written a book about Jersey.
Yeah,
they don't seem bothered. It came about because I had this idea of the suitcase, and it actually started because this happened to a friend of ours. So a friend came to visit, and they picked up the wrong suitcase at the airport, and the airport just sort of gave them this girl's number, and they went to meet up. And I thought, I mean, that wasn't the beginning of a meet cute, because my friend was married with a child on holiday, and his bag was full of like nappies and like formula.
Very sexy.
But it kind of got me thinking, like, oh, imagine if that was actually, if you were both single and that was how you met, like through swap luggage. So I wanted to set it somewhere on like a small enough island that you could just literally call up the airport and go and meet someone. I don't think that would happen if you lost your bag in New York City. There would be like lots of forms to fill in.
They would be like, good luck, Chuck. You're never going to see that stuff again.
Here's the insurance form. Go.
Yeah.
So, and also I moved to Jersey myself 7 years ago, and I just fell in love with it. It's a really interesting island. It's got so much history here. It's got sort of just beautiful beaches, and it's only like an hour's flight from the UK. And I had never been here before I moved here. And I think maybe sometimes when you move to a place, you kind of see like the wonder of it in a way that people who've lived here all their lives, like maybe forget to notice. So I definitely felt like it's just a really lovely setting for a kind of romantic getaway break, because it's sort of, and also an island. There's just something about an island where it's like small community and everyone knows each other. And, you know, there's a few little in jokes about kind of pronunciation and stuff, that pronunciation that people in Jersey will get.
Yeah, it's a fascinating. I loved that, many of the places, for those who aren't familiar with Jersey, I myself had to look it up, very close to France, very heavily influenced by French culture in the English Channel. So the town names and place names are in French. But if I'm correct, the pronunciation is like sort of a anglicized version of what they would think it would sound like.
Yes, I mean, I will get this wrong if I say, because again, I'm an immigrant, so I probably get it wrong. But like in general, it seems to be like the names, like if you like the French surnames are all kind of pronounced slightly French still, but lots of the road names, like I live on a road that has a French name, but you don't have to put on a French accent to kind of say the road name. But yeah, so it's this kind of weird mashup between England and France, and it's got amazing food because it's by the sea, and it's just sort of got this incredible history to it that is endlessly fascinating to me.
It sounds fascinating. It sounds like a beautiful place to visit. The French and English kind of cultural mix reminded me a little bit of parts of like Louisiana and the States that have that like Creole or Cajun influence.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I would love to visit. I've been to the UK not many times, but I guess twice, and I studied there for 6 months, but I never made it off to the Channel Islands, so I will have to do that. And then the island part is such a big part of the book because she's there for a story, right? A travel piece. And I found the sort of social media influencer aspect of this book absolutely hilarious because Laura's having to try to have this, meaningful experience, meet cute, but she's also got this job, right? She's on the clock essentially. And, people are paying for her travel. So she has to do these Instagram lives or she has to post these various pictures. And that must have been so fun to sort of come up with too, what you might see. Are there certain sort of spots in Jersey that are hot spots for the photo op or?
Yes, so they're all real places. All the places she goes to, some of the house names and stuff I changed. But she's basically going on a tour around Jersey because she's trying to retrace the steps of her parents who actually met in Jersey,
right?
And had this incredibly romantic meeting themselves. So she's trying to do that and please her boss by doing all these Instagram lives about kind of like promoting the island while she's trying to track down her suitcase, and she doesn't have any of her clothes and she doesn't have any clean pants. And she's being driven around by this grumpy taxi driver. So for me, this is like the classic ingredients of just like an adventure, where you're kind of away from home and you're trying to do something for work, but you're kind of, what you really want to be doing is focusing on meeting the hot guy whose suitcase you've got.
Absolutely. And her boss is such a wonderful, horrible character in this novel. As somebody who's definitely had a few bosses in my life who are not Suki-esque, but veering there. I love that she was just always calling and asking her for things. And it was a very specific, I'm thinking that may have been inspired by past experience, but she really left off the page for me.
Well, actually, I was talking to my agent about we were talking about bosses, and the character of Suki, who's her boss, is in one way incredibly harsh and kind of quite cruel in her expectations, but then on the other hand she can be instantly switch and be very flattering and very she's your best friend. And I think that's the kind of boss that's actually the scariest, because you don't know where you stand, right? And 1 minute you think you're doing a great job and they're saying you're doing a wonderful, and then the next minute they're like you're terrible. And so it's almost worse than having someone who is consistently evil.
Exactly. She really gets taken on a journey there too. And I also think, I don't think this is a spoiler, but another big character in the book is this character of Ted, who is her taxi driver, which I love the idea of a friendship with a taxi driver, especially something you don't see often, single women traveling alone, getting on with their taxi drivers. But it's so clever. And I was wondering, was there an element of the book that came to you first? Was suitcase first, and then all these other things came into play? Or did you know that you wanted to have sort of two options for her? I'm curious.
So I definitely, the suitcase came first, and then I just thought what would be quite nice is just to have her, she needs a tour guide for the island, someone who's going to help her. And because she's on a road trip, I just thought a taxi driver would be a really good jumping off point. And it also means she gets to, she basically gets guided around the island by Ted, and he is they're chalk and cheese, and he's not someone she would be friends with usually. And you know, I think his story and his kind of family life starts to illuminate a lot about Laura's own life. And I love books where you have that kind of like unlikely friendships that form, that actually kind of, yeah, can become a really valuable relationship in the story. So yeah, you kind of, Ted's a big part of it as well, and helps her kind of, I think, change internally as well, with all her romantic expectations.
Absolutely. The characters in this book are just so unlike any really I've ever read. I think that's such a skill that you have. They're so familiar, and they manage to be familiar, but also people that I would not have encountered otherwise. So it's always an adventure. I think it's hard to do that, right?
Yes. Oh, thank you. That's really nice of you to say, because I think that is what, you know, I think what people really enjoyed about This Time Next Year was that sense of like community, and like, you know, those old fashioned rom-coms like For Weddings and Love Actually, where you have a real ensemble cast and it's not just about the main man and woman. And I think for me, like, you know, I loved all the characters in This Time Next Year. And that was the challenge for me, was having these kind of secondary characters that all had their own thing to say and their own little storyline. And yeah, I hope that I have delivered on that here, because there's lots of weird and wonderful people in this book.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it, though, is it's an ensemble and you're sort of juggling multiple people's hopes and dreams and stories and challenges all at once. So I think that's the great word for it.
I think also, you know, this book, one of the major themes is kind of romantic expectation, and whether, you know, love second time round, and also kind of how love evolves as you get older. And I think what's nice about having an ensemble cast is that you can hear all the different characters' views on that. And actually, you know, I think, you know, you have the main character of Laura, who's on her own journey, but she meets all these people in Jersey who have very differing views and differing experiences. And I think, you know, for me going through life, that's one of the most interesting things, is hearing other people's perspectives and allowing that to kind of influence my own outlook.
Absolutely. And I wonder too, Sophie, like some of our audience members here on Lit Chick are people who are interested in writing or writing their own books. And I'm curious, this sort of sophomore novel always gets like the big ooh scary in the writing community, because you had such a great success with This Time Next Year. You know, it was a New York Times bestseller. People are still buying it very recently. And so I was just kind of curious about the process as you came up with this next story idea. Was this something that came about after you'd finished the first? Was this something you had like in reserve in the case that this would happen?
So I had started writing this and actually kind of been contracted to write this before This Time Next Year even came out, actually. So there's kind of like this year-long lag really from finishing a novel through editing and promotion and things. So in a way, I feel like I didn't suffer too much from the kind of sophomore like novel, because I hadn't had any of the success yet while I was still writing it. I'd pretty much finished it by the time This Time Next Year came out. And if anything, I'm probably having that struggle now with my third novel, because like I feel really proud of both these books, and I feel like whatever happens with them, like I love these books. And I think when you get to book 3, I have had obviously the experience of the New York Times and being in book clubs, and like now's where I kind of get the fear and go, can I do it again? I don't know. But yeah, maybe with other novelists, you haven't started necessarily by the time this one's come out. So I think this was very much kind of in the works by the time This Time Next Year happened. So that probably helped. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's nice probably to have had something to distract you while all this other stuff was happening. You weren't able to worry too much about it.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
That's exciting. Well, can you tell us a little bit about what the new book is, or is that still in the brain vault at the moment?
Well, I can tell you it's about a wedding. It's about a wedding that goes disastrously wrong. But yeah, I'm not going to say too much more than that. But yeah, I love the world of weddings and the like romance of them, but also the drama. So yeah, it's going to be a wedding book. So watch this space for that.
Yes, definitely. That's really exciting. Well, as somebody who's in the process of planning a wedding right now, it's like you could write about that forever. What a weird, wild, crazy industry that is.
The Wedmen.
Rich with stuff. The wedding industrial complex. I hope that you're taking them down in a way that only Sophie Cousens can do. Giving them their day. But that's really exciting. I think that, the rom-com space is huge right now. But it's interesting and refreshing to find people who are still making it interesting, making it not just about the man. I love that if you're, interested in twists on rom-coms in our audience, you mentioned the Bechtel Test a couple of times in your book, which comes out a few times. For those that don't know, the Bechtel Test is, I think, from Alison Bechdel, but it's this principle that you could have a conversation between two women that isn't about a man, or anything related to love or romance. And so your characters are hilariously, I thought this scene was so funny, very deliberately trying so hard to have a conversation that was not about a man, but also being in a rom-com. Did that come about organically? Was that in response to feedback, or?
Well, I think that was for me, like, I just find those kind of like self-referential, like we're talking about being in a book when we're in a book, quite funny. But also it is a challenge. Like, I think that's another theme that comes up in a book, is this, as a modern woman, how you balance your kind of romantic aspirations and perhaps like love of rom-coms and romance with being a feminist. And as a romance writer, that is also like a eternal challenge, I find, is kind of having kind of realistic modern women who don't need to be like rescued by a man, but still having that kind of romance and swoony kind of element to it. And so I think that storyline for me was a lot of fun, just having the friends, be very self-aware about not wanting just to be the best friend who gets called up and told about like the man gossip and what's happening. They're like, hello, I am like a real person. Like, can we talk about politics or maybe the books we're reading? I don't want to just be like the best friend sounding board. So yeah, that made me laugh. So I don't know.
It made me laugh so hard. I think too, because I've been reading so many of these rom-coms, that anytime that it does get a little self-referential or like aware of what it is, just particularly appealing to me too as a reader, because we do see so many of the same things. And it's kind of, it's a space that is a very defined genre, but also gives you an opportunity to really like play with the genre immensely. And I think that that's done really effectively, particularly in Just Haven't Met You Yet, which I think is,
I think as well, like when I wrote This Time Next Year, I was kind of quite green, I suppose, about like the rom-com genre. Like, I had read some, but I was mainly kind of a huge fan of movies. That was kind of my inspiration. And I think the more I've read, and now I've read loads and I get sent loads of proofs, which is really exciting. I just kind of am becoming more familiar with like the fan base, and also all the tropes that people love, and all the kind of just the history behind kind of rom-coms. And I'm finding it kind of really interesting to kind of dig into like the other books that I love and why I think they work. But also, as I said, it's quite fun for me to feel like I've got something different to contribute and maybe subvert some of those expectations a little bit.
Absolutely. And that's another question I wanted to ask Sophie, because you've been writing for a while, right? You have these 2 books that came out fairly recently during the COVID-19 pandemic. But I'm curious, like, when you started out writing, was rom-com a space that was naturally where you were drifting to? Were you writing other kinds of things? What kind of things do you read to like get you in the headspace, I guess?
That's a really good question. Actually, no. When I first started writing, the first book I ever wrote was a sci-fi young adult book. Didn't get published, but that was the first book that I wrote. And then I was writing slightly more. I think when I first started writing, I didn't really understand genre. So I think this is where I went wrong, because I was just like writing kind of like sprawling rap things that kind of had a bit of this and a bit of that in. And I think what was interesting is actually when This Time Next Year came up, and I was talking to the publisher about the kind of genre that they liked, it kind of clicked for me of like, oh right, okay, so this is a rom-com. And that for me felt like a really natural home actually to my style. And it kind of fitted and clicked in a way that maybe me writing sci-fi was not quite there yet. And also I think some of my earlier attempts, I didn't really have that much humor in it. And I think for me, writing these kind of characters, I don't know why I didn't try it before, because the kind of books I used to love, like all the Sophie Cousens and Bridget Jones, that's the kind of humor I love to read. So that was a bit of a breakthrough kind of moment for me, when I was like, oh, I could I could just write the kind of stuff I find funny.
Right. Which is probably so much easier anyway, too, because it's familiar and
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I think the challenge for me is, like a lot of criticism of like rom-coms is, it's too predictable. Like, you know how it's going to end. And I think that for me is the challenge, because, the definition of writing a romance is it has to have a happy ever after. But the question, I suppose, is like, what is that happy ever after? And is it what you thought it was going to look like at the beginning? But, for me, I love reading books where I've just got no idea where it's going to go. So that's the challenge for me, is trying to have a few twists and turns and like not necessarily end up in the place you think it's going to end up. But that's hard.
Absolutely. I think that there's a big discourse in the rom-com community about happily ever after, whether that's something that we owe our readers, whether that's why they're coming to the book. And so the idea of giving them, yes, this is what you expect. Like, we're not going to surprise you horribly, but you might come away with something new. That is an enormous challenge. And I think like the more rom-coms that come out, the sort of harder it becomes to find that subversion. But that also makes the challenge a lot more fun, I think, ultimately.
And also, I think it's not necessarily a happy ever after. It's you want, the reader wants to finish the book with a feeling of like, positivity and being uplifted and like believing in love. I suppose you don't want to finish a romance novel and suddenly a comet hits and everybody dies, because it might leave you with the wrong feeling. So I think for me as a writer, it's about trying to imagine the feeling that I want my readers to finish the book with, and then work out how my story can give them that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, an impossible challenge. I think we had in the ticker earlier some questions from the audience, and I wonder whether I think I'd seen some in the chat that could come up too. But yeah, I think that the challenge is what makes it fun. Okay, here's a great question from Sylvia. If you'd never been there, I was going to ask this question too. What prompted your move to Jersey?
That is a good question. So my husband got offered a job here, and we came just for like a year. I was a freelancer. I worked in TV, so it was very easy for me to kind of take a break and just say, right, let's go to Jersey and see how it works out. And then we just stayed. His job got extended, and then he got a different job. And we used to live in London, and then we had 2 small children. And actually, going back to the city seemed like quite hard work, just in what we could afford to buy with a family. So it became more and more appealing as a place for young children. It's really lovely, and we've made friends here. And so for now we're here, we're Jerseyites, but we'll see what happens in the future.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm so envious of you. I've talked to you and Jenny Bayless as well, who's also living by the seaside. And I just think as a writer, like must be so nice to be surrounded by so much natural beauty too. I think that sounds like an ideal spot. And I'm curious, like, do you have a dedicated writing space on the island? Do you write in coffee shops? Pre-COVID, were you writing at home? I'm imagining you taking long walks on the beach and looking contemplatively into the horizon, but maybe that's just me.
I do take long walks. I've just literally before this been on a long walk on the beach, actually, because whenever it's sunny, Jersey in the winter is quite rainy and bleak. It can be. So when there's a sunny day, you've got to get out and get to the sea. Yeah. And having not lived by the sea before, now I have lived here, I feel so I don't know, like reinvigorated by the sea. It's like a landscape that's just forever changing, and I find it very calming. There's a line in Just Haven't Met You Yet where one of the characters says that looking out to sea feels like the what's the word? I had a complete mind blank now. Spirit level. It's like the spirit level for your soul. If you just stare out to sea, it just resets everything. And I really feel that to be true for me. I think it's very kind of grounding and calming, and kind of takes you out of the smallness of your own existence in some way. So I absolutely love living by the sea now, and I hope I always will be able to.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think that, maybe this book will inspire some sort of Jersey writers retreat book club thing. I think it was funny that you'd mentioned the other Channel Island, which is, I think, Guernsey. Is that right?
Guernsey. Yeah.
Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Society. Yes, it had its moment. So now we're wanting Jersey to reclaim its time from the.
Yeah. So that is like a little. That's a little in joke, because whenever you say you're from the Channel Islands, if people don't know it, that's the one thing they've heard of is the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie book. So yeah, it's funny that like everyone, so Laura comes here and everyone's like, oh my God, is that Guernsey? Is that like that book? And she's like, no, it's the other Channel Islands.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a bit of rivalry between Guernsey and Jersey, like, you know, like there always is with like places that are close. So yeah, it's a little in joke for.
Is there a difference between the two of them culturally, or not really?
Well, Jersey's just like way better, but no. Yeah. So Jersey's a little bit bigger. It's kind of 100,000 people, whereas Guernsey's like 60,000 people. And Guernsey's actually got a very cute little kind of, St. Peter Port is like a beautiful little harbour with like old-fashioned streets, but it doesn't necessarily have as many beaches as Jersey has got. Mm-hmm. But yeah, culturally they both amazing food, both obviously kind of French influences, and yeah, both occupied during the war, which was a major factor in the kind of history of both islands.
Yes, and I think that that's what the book is. Oh, we have a shout out in the comments for another Channel Island here. Alderney, I believe is the pronunciation.
Alderney, yeah, Alderney. Okay. So yeah, so there's so the main three Channel Islands is Guernsey, Jersey, and Alderney, but there's lots of other little islands as well. So yeah, it's a real kind of community of islands that people amazing. Kind of get, you know, you can do a little day trip to get between them and things.
I like it. Well, that Guernsey book performed well, so here's hoping Just Haven't Met You Yet will best it. I have no allegiance and have never been to either place, but now I'm a Jersey girl, I guess. Which means something else entirely on the East Coast. If you say I'm a Jersey girl, not the same vibe at all, unfortunately.
Well, and Jersey in the US was named Jersey because someone from the Jersey Channel Islands went there. So it is like, you know, culture home. So yeah, you have to have allegiance to the original Jersey.
Yes, I think for those familiar with the US Jersey, there's, maybe I'm imagining this incorrectly, there's fewer sort of party vibes happening on the Jersey shore here.
Oh, right. Is that a Jersey girl?
Maybe I'm wrong.
Is a US Jersey girl, is that like a party girl? Is that like,
yeah,
kind of like,
it's you know, it's a little bit like the Love Island stereotype with the like heavily made up and the big font and the, you know, that kind of thing. So your Jersey is far more literary, but I'm sure the Jerseys people in the audience will be coming for me later. They're extremely defensive as well.
Well, there's bound to be some of those people here, but then yeah, there's also lots of people, more like dog walkers and welly boots, and there's everyone here. There's everyone here, you know.
That's fantastic. And your writing, I'd love to know a little bit more about your writing routine, Sophie, if you're comfortable sharing. So you're doing this full time now, but are you writing in the mornings? Has COVID been helpful or a hindrance? Did you write this time next year, I guess, in the before times in Jersey also, or I don't know how the timelines work.
Yeah, so I wrote This Time Next Year actually. So This Time Next Year is all set in a 2020 where there's no pandemic,
right?
Because I wrote it
delightful,
which I find is delightful, but some people are very confused because they're like, this does not look like the 2020 that I was experiencing.
Yeah.
But then I feel like if the lack of a pandemic is the only thing about this book that's unrealistic, then, you know, there's problems. But yeah, so no, I wrote that in the evening. I had a job at an arts charity. That's 2019. And I wrote This Time Next Year in the evenings. And then it came out in 2020, obviously, where 2020 looked very different. And then I was able to leave my job, and I'm now a writer full time. And so, yeah, I just kind of write around picking my children up from school. And, you know, it's amazing how short the day is when you suddenly have to, like, you know, go to sports club and then go to a different one, you know, do brownies and all these clubs that little kids end up doing. But yeah, so I feel very, very lucky and very privileged that I'm able to do this now as my day job, because I know a lot of writers who fit it around other jobs, and it is like really, really difficult to do.
Yeah. It's interesting too, just how COVID changed it for so many people. I think some people found, wow, I've got all this time, I can finally write the novel that I've been wanting to work on. And some felt, you know, this is so crazy and distracting, and now I've got to care for children, or I have other responsibilities that I didn't normally have. And so it's interesting to see how it all pans out. But I'd forgotten that This Time Next Year was 2020, because time is such a strange thing. But if you're looking for a book that really does, you know, rewrite history in a far more pleasant way, I highly, highly recommend This Time Next Year. Yeah. it was very refreshing to have it not have happened at all.
But I think but ironically though, now I have like more of the day to write, and I'm not talking about my writing routine. I'm not a very efficient writer. I don't know. My favorite part of writing is thinking of the story, and I love like the ideas, and then I am not a planner. So lots of people plan their novels, so they'll think of everything. And then they'll just have the whole structure worked out, and it's just a case of sitting down and doing it. And for me, I just have that kind of first nugget, which is, in this situation, it was, picking up the wrong suitcase. And then I have an idea of a character, which is like, so Laura, like crazy romantic. And then I kind of write the novel by kind of going on the journey with her. And it's much more fun for me to write that way, because I don't know what's going to come around the corner. And hopefully that means maybe some of the readers don't know what's coming around the corner. But it does mean you then get to the end of the novel and various strands don't make sense or are just completely out of left field. So you then have to spend a lot of time going back and kind of fixing everything. Whereas I kind of wish I could be a planner and just have everything sorted from the beginning. And I feel like I would waste a lot less time if I did it that way.
It's so interesting to hear everybody kind of writes their way into things, but there's something about your process that I think is also echoed in the writing style, which is it does feel organic, and it does feel twisty, and you don't totally know where it's going to end up. I think when you're writing in genre, like plotting can be very comfortable because you have a blueprint of sort of where you're headed, and so you can plug in whatever is needed. But you do, I think there is a risk of losing some of that spark or some of that interest.
I think for me, so the coat alcove scene, which you will remember, but for people who haven't read it, just you'll look out, you'll know when you get to it. That for me was, again, if I had sat down to plan a novel and said, right, well, this is going to happen, I just don't think I could have thought of that. Yeah, I had just like a clear page of a plot. Whereas when I got Laura into a certain situation, and I was trying to, for me, the kind of humor I think is funny is putting someone in a situation and thinking, right, what's the worst thing that could happen to this character now? And this is the worst thing that could happen if you just kind of broken into someone's house. And I just, that was the delight for me in writing those kind of scenes, was it just kind of came to me when I put her in that house. And I'm not sure that scene would have happened if I'd kind of planned it from the beginning.
Yeah, totally. I think it really comes across in the reading experience that you're like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? Doesn't feel totally logical. And the twists, of course, I'm not going to give away the twists in Just Haven't Met You Yet, which, it's a twist and it isn't a twist about what happens in the end. But I think it is really, there were several moments where I had no idea what she was going to choose. So that's, a success as well.
Good. And also, I think with romances, even if you see what's coming in a romance, I don't think people read romances to be like, twist and turn and suddenly like a massive like rug pull like you do in like a thriller. That's what you want in a thriller. You want like a third act rug pull. And I think for romances, if you've got the characters and you've got the story and you've got the themes, and you've got that kind of feeling of falling in love with your characters as they do, I think that's the most important thing for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we have a question in the chat too a little while back. I can pop this up, which is, who are you reading? I mean, I think that's another thing. You mentioned Bridget Jones, you mentioned Sophie Cousens. Are there any contemporary movies, books that you feel like you're picking up on your humor from? Because it feels very contemporary, very fresh. I know you're on TikTok, which we can talk about later too.
I started TikTok, but I'm a little like out of my depth with TikTok. I feel like it's opening a door. It's like opening Pandora's box and like looking in and going, oh, this looks really fun. But no, I will lose hours of my life if I do this properly.
100%, especially if you're trying to work on a book. That app is
I know. It's like, but part of me also is like a little bit obsessed, and like 20-year-old me, if there'd been TikTok, I would have been there. That would have been me. I just I love that kind of like little videos and like little ideas. But it's like a time suck. So in terms of writers, so I love like writers like Lindsay Kelk and Vari McFarlane. Like this Holly McLaughlin in the UK, like just writers who are kind of writing rom-coms but with like a little bit more of a serious edge to it, or just like things that like in unique settings. Like I love I've been reading a lot now because I get Beth O'Leary. I also love her books. But then, yeah, alongside the rom-coms, because I read so many, I like to mix it up. And I've actually just really enjoyed reading some books that are kind of, I don't even know what the genre is. I've just been listening to Piranesi, which is, I don't even know how to describe it, but yeah, we won a Women's Award for fiction. And it's you just don't know, it's like a fantasy novel, and you just don't know what it is or where it's going, and it kind of takes you on this journey in the same way that maybe Addie LaRue did. I don't know if any viewers have read that, but I absolutely adored that book because, again, it just takes you on this journey, and you've just got no real idea of like the expectation of the genre or how it's going to pan out or where it might end. And yeah, so I really enjoy reading that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think, you know, when you're writing rom-com, it's good to read rom-com, but also reading widely and finding things that you would never get your hold on. I've been reading some nonfiction lately that's just been blowing my mind. So it's a different kind of storytelling too.
Yeah. And I always feel guilty when I'm not reading rom-coms because I have so many proofs I should be reading, because, you know, it's nice to like quote for other authors, and it's a very like it's a really supportive community, and I feel like people are kind enough to read my books, and so it's really nice to return the favor to other authors, and especially newer ones starting out. But yeah, I'm not a very fast reader, so it is hard to make time to read all the books you want to read in your genre, but also to have time to read some nonfiction or some slightly more literary things or fantasy or sci-fi or whatever.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, I think people are sending you books because they're loving what you're doing, Sophie. So they're excited to share with you, because it's been really fun to watch just your career blow up. And I won't say I read This Time Next Year before everybody else in the US, but I did read it very early on. So it's fun to watch and be like, yes, girl, get it. Like,
yay, good.
It's really exciting. So folks, I want to say, like, check out Just Haven't Met You Yet, This Time Next Year, are excellent gifts for anybody. If you feel like if you're new to rom-com, I really recommend Sophie as somebody to kind of get you in there, because it's not super strictly rom-com. It's got a lot of that twists and turns that you may be familiar with in other genres as well. Sophie's
got a gateway drug. It's a rom-com gateway drug.
It is a rom-com gateway drug. Yes, exactly. It is a slippery slope. Be careful where you step. I think it really got me started on a lot of rom-com journeys. So, and this book will be out next week in the US on Tuesday. Please pre-order. I don't know, Sophie, I'm sure somewhere on Jersey you've signed copies, but
so actually there is I've also sent in the States, I've sent some signed book plates to the Unabridged bookstore in Chicago. If you look it up on my Instagram page, I've got a link to them, because I know some people like to support independent bookstores and also to have a signed copy. So yeah, the Unabridged bookstore in Chicago, it's on my Instagram, if you would like to have a signed copy in the US.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Thank you for doing that for us over across the pond. We really love indies here, and super important to support them with pre-orders for Christmas time. Things are moving slowly, as we've been saying on Lit Chick for months now. So go ahead and order those. Please give Sophie a follow on Instagram. She's at Sophie_Cousens. Lots of fun information coming out there. I cannot wait to see like what comes next with this book. And we're really so grateful to have had you on Lit Chick and on A Mighty Blaze. You were on last year, got you this year, hopefully next year. Who knows where we'll be, but there'll be something exciting coming in the pipeline. So thank you all for watching. Lit Chick will actually be off next week, and we'll update you with our holiday schedule very shortly. But thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.
Of course.